And so, as Kyle mentioned, my name is Noelle Dickinson, and I have experience working with the Breadfruit Institute for the past 5 years. Prior to that, I am a small farmer that we still have a small farm on Kauai. So I was born and raised here on Oahu, and we moved to Kauai when I was in high school. So I got to graduate from Waimea High on West Kauai. And I still, there we go, yeah, West Kauai in the house. Waimea, go menehune. Okay, so I'm a proud Kauai girl, and I am honored that in my position, I'm able to support my immediate community, and that is, at the end of the day, my ultimate goal is to kind of raise up Kauai farmers and West Kauai farmers in particular, as well as our local children, our youth, and show that there's more opportunity in agriculture than big ag or traditional sort of ag. Yeah. So I would like to kind of turn to our panel and have each one of our panelists introduce themselves. And I'll do the same as Mingwei did and say, please, 2 minutes each, and then we'll do an interactive discussion of education and breadfruit education and where are the gaps and what is your experience with education. So if each of the panelists could kind of introduce yourself and talk about your role in breadfruit education. Okay.
You want me to start?
Yeah, I got the mic.
I'll just thank you. Aloha mai kako bula malolo'o lele yakwe now yakwe in relip yeah kaselele manko, and that's I think all I know. I don't really know any Samoan. Again, my name is Mingwei, and I am an educator, and I love teachers. My passion is working with teachers. Most of my work is in farm to school and school learning gardens. So on your tables, thanks to a partnership with the Ulu Cooperative and many partners, we are using Ulu as a teaching tool. As you heard from the panelists, not only a teaching tool for health, but teaching tool for business and math, and as we opened up, a teaching tool to preserve our culture. So my work is a lot in producing books and lesson plans and curriculum, etc. around Ulu. One of the books that was out here, I'm gonna ask Joe to wave it. Again, it's a children's book, and we borrowed a lot from Craig. Thank you, Craig. It's a children's book on agroforestry, and in there, just as what Craig was mentioning. So that's a lot of my work within the education. And later, I'll also talk a little bit of advocacy, because that's the other title in today's session. Thank you very much.
Aloha, I'm Dr. Auntie Elizabeth. I'm a deep pastist in order to be a good futurist. An evolution biologist is a deep pastist. I got a PhD in Western science, and then I learned from indigenous people. Learned more there. Learned more because I was passionate about Earth and the life of Earth and what we humans are doing. And my own culture didn't understand any of that very well. For one thing, they didn't understand that life, even though they recognize at both standard physics and quantum levels that the universe is basically made of vibrations, they don't get that the low keys, think of this as a keyboard, that the low keys are matter, and then you get energy, and then you get spirit. The higher up you go on that one keyboard, the more rare, the less material things are. Every tree doesn't have a soul. It's a body, mind, spirit. You're not somebody with a soul. You're a body, mind, spirit. Or maybe a spirit having a human experience for now, and then you'll go and play only in the high keys. But it's really good to have the low keys around. And all the indigenous cultures I've met have really, really understood this. And so they could commune with the trees, and they understood healthy food. I just recently, someone said to me when I said I grew up on organic food, and I'm 86, they said, well, where did you live? I said, the whole world was eating organic food when I was a child. There was no word for it because it was food, right? It's like indigenous cultures. You know what things are. And what were we talking about? What's the name of some tree or something? I was once asked to teach a biology class on a whale watching tour and be on shore and look at the tide pools. And I said, oh my goodness, what am I going to do? I don't even know what the names of those creatures are. And an indigenous friend of mine said, no worries. Just sit down and let them all meditate on one of those creatures and ask it what it wants to be called. We impose on nature instead of watching and listening. I was once in the Amazon, first time I was in the Amazon with a long-haired Indian, and I said, can you teach me to talk to the plants and animals? I was that naive still. And he said, oh, shut up, Elizabeth, and listen. That conversation's been going on as long as the forest has been here. Your job is to hear it, not to initiate it. So I had a lot of great lessons by working with indigenous people, and I became a co-founder of something instigated by Dr. Apila Colorado on Maui. And that's the Worldwide Indigenous Science Network. All of what I'm saying is a context for how we advertise or promote or educate about ulu. And I do love you saying use ulu as a teaching tool, because everything is related to everything else, and that's a great way to put it. And that's what we need in our education. We need to stand up for the indigenous peoples of the world as the only people who know how to navigate this perfect storm of crises. They knew enough to build canoes that weren't bolted together but were flexibly tied so they could ride the waves, right? And they made it around the world without a compass. And they made it in the spirit of aloha and teaching people malamahonoa. Yeah? So that's the spirit in which, the context in which we have to spread the information about ulu is maybe we need a United Nations of indigenous peoples, an indigenous United Nations. Rather than going to the UN to ask for things, we've got to tell people. And so ulu is a wonderful, wonderful symbol for the tree of life, right? It's so basic and it's so versatile. And we want the information to get out, but we cannot do it the way my culture takes some plant out of the Amazon and looks at the chemistry and pulls out what they think is the active ingredient, and then they toss away everything, mana and all. And it doesn't work as well as it did in its indigenous culture. And neither will ulu work as well in the world if we cannot teach it in that complete context, so that the ulu's mana really stays with it. Thank you.
Hello, talofa everyone. Bula, I'm Steve Hazelman. I'm from Samoa, but I'm based in Fiji at the Pacific Community. The Pacific Community is owned by the 22 Pacific Island countries and territories, plus the US, New Zealand, Australia, and France. It's a regional, it's like the EU of the Pacific. Within there is our organization called the Pacific Organic and Ethical Trade Community, POETCOM. It was founded by at that time gender was not important. In 2003, there was only men at the meeting. Gender was important, but only men was at the meeting. And they saw that organic had a future. And their dream was to keep the Pacific Islands green, blue, pristine, and safe. This is way back in 2003. And there's a lot of changes, and right now, POETCOM is now the Secretariat is based within the Pacific community. We are in 17 countries, mainly NGOs. We work through farmers' organization. And all we do is to promote organic, regenerative, ecological farming with the belief that all the efforts in our fragile island environment should be following that. I'm one of the people that was mentioned who founded PFON in 2012. In fact, the name, I'm proud to tell Kyle that I gave the name in the recommendation. And also POETCOM, and there's another one, PIRIS, the Pacific Island Rural Advisory Services. Now, my mind at the time was, the interest in those groups was to address gaps. And as Kyle said this morning, normally when you're in a regional body like that, you work through governments. And that's the normal way, but you need to change the way of doing things. So that's how we were interested in joining this. And I think also involved in the Samoa Farmers Association with Laupepe and Interstart and Te Taveuni. I want to mention that group in Taveuni because business as usual, 15 to 20 years ago, with taro, they were able to get 15 to 20 tons per hectare. Dr. Rohit Lal, who's the head of, reported last year, they're struggling to get 4 to 5 tons per hectare. So you do the math and you know what happened. It was just chemistry with NPK, cut down the forest and all that. So Te Taveuni was set up by concerned citizens to address this. They saw that keep on applying inputs was not giving back the yield. So I suppose with the topic that we are supposed to talk about is where this group has tried to do things like this. A particular stuff that I was involved with breadfruit in Kiribati, Rotan knows. It was a funny story. The scientists, there was a report that there's an anthracnose destroying the trees. The fruit turns brown and it makes it very hard. So the scientists in SPC said, well, you have to remove the infected fruits. But the officers there, Nakaputa, said, yeah, that's very good. But our trees is 40 meters high. How can you logically or practically remove? So the only answer, because of the fragile environment in atolls, is to prune the trees to a manageable level. And we were laughing when my brother from Cook Island was telling the story of breadfruit. All Pacific Islanders know that we hated this tree. And I'll tell you why. Growing up, when it's the season, it's doing the umu or the lovo every day. So you come back from school at 2 o'clock and you want to go to rugby practice at 4:30, you can't go because the old people will make sure that nothing is wasted, because during the season. And then as the season stops, it's automatically pruned. So when there's all this talk about this, we grew up doing that. And it wasn't fun. And we can't eat breadfruit every day, I tell you. But it's very important that there is now commercial use for the crop that our islands can benefit from. Thank you.
Aloha. My name is Ian Kennedy, and I run the Breadfruit People Network, which at its core is an information sharing network for breadfruit. And so primarily we want to capture and share the cultural knowledge behind breadfruit, as well as then the technical information that we can have it in one location and easily spread it out. And so Breadfruit People right now is an online website, social media, and we're trying to capture and highlight what's going on here with breadfruit throughout the South Pacific, North Pacific, and really capture through these research projects and the developments that come out of it through the farmers that are coming up with the needs they need addressed for their breadfruit and their culture, to capture that knowledge and to be able to share it across the network through Facebook, through our website, to have that repository of information.
Thank you, panel. Thank you. So those were really great discussions that I think we can have amongst ourselves at our tables. But before then, I would like to just reiterate what Breadfruit Institute does, because I think I kind of focused on myself a little bit there with Waimea. But so Breadfruit Institute is charged with curating and managing the collection of NTBG that Dr. Rigoni is largely responsible for pulling together. And as a part of that, we, at South Shore Gardens, at McBride Gardens, we have a agroforestry demonstration which serves as a living sort of classroom, but of course produces food because we have food plants, of course, growing in it. So in the 5 years since that project has begun, we've hosted quite a few educational groups, as well as some interns and researchers, but mostly we've done a lot of harvesting and monitoring of diversity over the last 5 years. So all of that harvest that we've collected has equaled to about 30,000 pounds, which we donated to local nonprofits, including the Kauai Independent Food Bank. And so that in and of itself, I think, has provided the opportunity for conversations to be had more readily about breadfruit, as breadfruit is given out in distribution boxes, especially during the pandemic. And so the customer base, if you will, for those food pantries and food banks was expanded during the last 2 years, right? So breadfruit was a part of that, at least on Kauai, to the tune of at least 20,000 pounds, and people were able to have these conversations about how are you gonna cook the breadfruit? How did you cook it last week, right? So with that, all that being said, and I'll also mention that we have online resources available through Breadfruit Institute, and there are also quite a few organizations here in Hawaii, including Breadfruit People, as Ian was highlighting, that have online resources available. The Hawaii Ulu Co-op has some really great resources for farmers as well as people looking to cook breadfruit. There's an extensive recipe catalog that they have, so I'll shout out Hawaii Ulu Co-op. And then Ming Wei, would you like to talk about your guide? And then after that, we'll go ahead and have our round table discussions there. Okay.
Is this, Ian, I might need you to wake this thing up. All right. Ah, lovely. Okay. So the Ulu Education Toolkit, if you just Google Ulu Education Toolkit or find it on your phone, you can play along. So this is a wonderful collaborative project spearheaded by the Ulu Co-op. And I can't remember what year, but you got a USDA Farm to School grant and partnered with the College of Education in UH Manoa, specifically with the STEM Squared program, and the Farm to School Hui. So I forgot to say, some of my hats are, Carly and I are part of a small not-for-profit Center for Getting Things Started, and we help the breadfruit people get the strategic plan started. We are also here to represent, I'm also here to represent the Hawaii Farm to School Hui, and I don't know if Olivia is still here from the Hawaii Farm to School Hui. So again, a partnership. We were looking at breadfruit, ulu, as a teaching tool. And when we did that, the teachers came for a wonderful curated experience with the Ulu Co-op, visited farms, and then they began looking around for educational resources that were already out there, and then slowly began to curate it. And this is one of the few interactive toolkits we have out there, and it's so exciting that it focuses on breadfruit, on ulu. And I just really wanted to share it with you because I know there are a lot of educators in the room that this is a resource you can use. And later, I would just love to pick brains. Please come and talk to me about if we were to expand this and be more inclusive. How could we do this, and how could we add resources or look for resources from our whole region? And then the second thing I just wanted to quickly say, sorry, Noel, is advocacy. And so I think some of you know that last year in Hawaii, we passed Act 175. Act 175 means that we have to have 30% local food by 2030 in all DOE schools. This is a real opportunity for Hawaii-grown starches, including ulu, but it takes advocacy and policy. So another thing that we really want to advocate with Breadfruit people, PIFON, all these wonderful alphabet soup organizations is that you represent thousands of farmers and thousands of educators. We need to have that advocacy around our local food so that it is in our schools. So just like as in Fiji, we are feeding our children ulu chips instead of Cheetos. So just wanted to shout out, please look up Act 175, signed into law in 2021, that the DOE, the Department of Education, must serve 30% local food by 2030. They only have 8 years to do this, so let's help them out. So just thank you very much, and passing it back to Noel.
Thank you, Mingwei. I'm definitely gonna use the recipe creator for sure with all the breadfruit. It's kind of breadfruit season, maybe the second wave of fruit. So now I'd like you all at your tables to kind of discuss our topic that we're covering, education and advocacy surrounding breadfruit. And particularly, I want you all to think about what are the gaps in education, and also what opportunities arise from those gaps, and what questions might you have for this panel. And then while you're discussing, be thinking about how were you introduced. I know as some here have grown up with it, but how were you introduced and educated about breadfruit? What have you recently learned about breadfruit while you're discussing with your table? So we'll do that for about 10 minutes, and then we'll reconvene, re-engage with each other about 2:53 or so. So go ahead and let's get this breadfruit conversation started. Okay. To our panel, maybe I'll start with Ian down on the end, and maybe we'll talk just for a second because we have quite maybe like 4 or 5 questions. And but how do you, as breadfruit people, get information out effectively?
Yeah, I would say one huge difference is having a repository of the information versus putting it out in your feed on Facebook, through website, through email, to where it's more available for digestion. And so breadfruit people, along with email listings and blasts for information and highlighting different projects that are going on, is constantly trying to highlight and link other projects that are currently being completed for breadfruit, and then putting that out in front of the entire network to see what's being done, and then highlighting the breadfruit champions we have, because one of the best things you can do is highlight the good work that's already being done, as well as that previous work that you're bringing back to the forefront, instead of having this pile of information just sit on a website or sit in a folder that's hard to find. You gotta constantly bring it out and put it out through that way. Yep.
Thank you. Okay, so another question that might be a little bit harder for me to answer, and I don't know about the panel, is why is it so hard to find breadfruit or buy breadfruit at the Kaka'ako market? So if anybody sells at the Kaka'ako market, you have a customer base that is in need. Is that you? Oh yeah, Kaka'ako market, they're in need of breadfruit. There you go. Okay, yeah. So there's definitely a customer base out there that's in need of fresh breadfruit. Okay, so the next question would be maybe along the lines of how do we get information out, was how do we excite our youth about growing food here in Hawaii and in our island nations? How do we excite them about growing food, but specifically, how do we excite them about breadfruit and breadfruit advocacy to kind of make it so that our next, the next Breadfruit Summit the room is twice this size, right? So how do we excite the youth about breadfruit? And maybe Mingwei, you can take this question.
I propose at our next summit, we have an Iron Chef contest, or whatever we want to call it, a Breadfruit Chef contest. And we have prizes, and we invite the children from the schools to feed us. So the contest is, instead of, we got bentos, like we invite the schools, and we tell them each school has to cook enough for maybe 50 of us, yeah, because there's 100, or 25, make up a number, and then we give them prizes, and we cheer them on. So I think that is one way, because the children love to cook. They really, really love to put things together. So that's one way. Another way, obviously, is so on eatbreadfruit.com, which is the Ulu Co-op's website. If you look at eatbreadfruit.com, what the Ulu Co-op did was to invite Kealakehe High School Culinary Arts Program to co-create the recipes. So that's when we first started years and years and years ago. There wasn't much out there. So instead of going first to the adult chefs, the Ulu Co-op approached a high school culinary arts program. And so those children got excited. So I think that's one of the ways. Let's have a cooking contest at our next summit.
Thank you. So along those lines, there was a suggestion that maybe there could be a campaign that when a child is born, let me check my time, okay. When a child is born, that their placenta is planted beneath a breadfruit tree. And so that kind of reminded me of my nephew. My mom's here, so I'm looking over at my mom. My nephew's placenta is planted under a lychee tree in his grandmom's yard. And so the lychee tree, I think, was chosen arbitrarily, but if he is now 16 and he goes back there and he talks about how that's his tree, right? He tells people the story. And so maybe there could be a campaign. This was a suggestion from one of the tables that breadfruit could be that tree, right? And so maybe I'll segue to Stephen. You could talk about what your suggestion, what we talked about with there being a breadfruit day. And there may already be a breadfruit day in Hawaii, but maybe some sort of official breadfruit day.
Yeah, thanks. I think 2019, Lavinia, I think Kyle, those who were in Samoa during the heads and ministers of agriculture meeting, we lobbied for the regional farmers organization to have a seat when the ministers and heads of agriculture meet. So we were successful in getting that seat in that meeting. So maybe in suggesting that with Kyle and Afamasanga, the next meeting of the heads and ministers will be in Nandi in March next year, that we put forward a suggestion for a World Breadfruit Day or a Pacific Breadfruit Day, because the other thing that is going is the World Coconut Day and all the events. It's a promotional awareness thing to make it, to give it that importance and prestige that it deserves. So how it's done, we need to draft something when the documents, and maybe your chair can present it, and we lobby around each of your delegation when they come. And the way we do it, we lobby doing cocktails, and by the next day they all agree to what we give them. Yeah, so that's one. And I think a previous speaker talked about origins of the product of coconut, of breadfruit. So I suppose something along the line of geographical integration, like they're trying to do this with kava. And what is happening now, they thought that they can promote kava as a real Pacific product, but then the countries put up their own. Vanuatu said, oh, that will harm our export, and so forth with that. Yeah, so those are the two. And just from my part, with organic certification for a crop like breadfruit, is very easy to do, because there's a lot of inputs that you can use in agroforestry systems, which can do the certification much quicker. Now, I think a really regional work that we have done in 2008, the Pacific Islanders got together and wrote our own Pacific Organic Standard. We thought, why are we following American, New Zealand, Hawaiian, European Union way of farming when our farming practices are very, very different? So we got the Pacific Organic Standard written. It took us 2 years to write with Pacific Islanders, and then it was accepted by the world body, which is IFOM, the International Federation of Organic Agricultural Movement. So that standard is there. It's the Pacific Gold Standard where all the countries are done in. So there are, as you know, there are two ways of organic certification. One is third party. Now, being an American state, the USDA owns the American standard. So the only way to get products from the Pacific Island into the US is to use the third-party system, which is, for some of our islands, is very expensive. It can be $5,000, $8,000 a year. It's like renewing your driver's license. But the benefit, it will get your product into the US market, to the EU, to the Japanese market, and so forth. Now, the world body got together in 2004 and said, what about small growers who are organic by default, but they cannot afford the third-party system? And that's where they came up with this thing called the participatory guarantee system, which in what we are doing in the Pacific, we are using the Pacific Organic Standard, and it's managed locally. So it's a much cheaper, but much stronger methodology, because the US auditor comes once a year, and I can, excuse the language, fiddle around with my documents and I get my certification and pay him $20,000. When the PGS is based on the community, the Pacificness, that we know one another, and we know who's the biggest liar in our community, take him out of your system. So there are options. And PGS certified products can be sold around the Pacific, and you guys can make your own decision, and so forth. And Singapore, Hong Kong, New Zealand and Australia are non-regulated markets at the moment. So that's how the organic thing is going. But for breadfruit, it's very easy to certify the farms and the processing products. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you. So with our last 5 minutes, I would like to ask Dr. Elizabeth about the farmer model and farmer education, and how maybe where are there gaps and where do you see that going? Yeah.
Well, about 10 years ago, the UN published a document saying that the only secure food future for the world lays in small local farms. And that means local farms of the kind I grew up with, where the plants and animals fed each other, the water tables improved, the soil improved over time. Nothing was lost on those farms. And again, that's something that indigenous peoples can teach. And it needs to get out to the world that monoculturing crops was always a bad idea, and that the separation of plants and animals in agriculture was caused two problems from one original solution, because you then had to feed both the plants and the animals artificially, which doesn't make any sense. So yes, we have to encourage small farming, encourage local food self-sufficiency, and then make it basic that ulu trees, wherever they can be grown in the world, should be part of that food forestry. All of these things that we've been talking about here. Now, there's another thing I'd like to add, is that, you know, people love food, they love eating, they love cooking. Cooking shows like Milk Street on TV could be cooking with ulu recipes if we informed them of them and gave them the option. The problem is going to be the availability of the ulu. Once we have some kind of perhaps a clearinghouse online for the added value products that can be shipped. And I would think about possibly it could be associated with eBay. I wouldn't want anything be bought on Amazon, I'm sorry, but they're not a good company. But eBay is a Hawaiian product, and I've never heard a bad word about it, and Pam Omidyar is a star of Oceania. So it's a very successful business, and it's a very ethical business, and perhaps they could help us to set up this kind of clearinghouse, which is what they are. They are a clearinghouse, in a sense, you know, to make the Ulu products more widely, more quickly available. And then we can hold the cooking contests and the cooking shows on YouTube and all of this. Children's books, I think, are a great way to go. And those can be put on iPhones now as cartoon books. There's just endless possibilities, and I think what's holding us up is the supply, the way of some kind of clearinghouse. So, Ming Wei and had good conversation.
Thank you. Yes, so I think the farmer to farmer model is definitely one that I would benefit from as a farmer, and the farmers in my community would benefit from, is kind of having a support group. I'll call it a co-op for lack of a better kind of term for it, or a network. That we could support producers who are not necessarily interested in growing breadfruit, but are interested in utilizing fresh products from farmers that they actually know, right? So I think that the Hawaii Ulu Co-op is definitely kind of fostering that kind of culture and community of growers, and that if we could kind of expand out on that, and I think Dana already mentioned that during her panel, I think that's where I see the future of breadfruit growing, especially kind of listening in on the conversations that I've had today. So with that, I think our panel is concluded. No? Okay, go ahead. You can close us out the last
I'm sorry,
minute.
I should have said this earlier, but we've got Richard Flyer in the room here. He has moved recently to Oahu, and he has a terrific track record in setting up food networks where all the players in growing local food get networked together with no funding needed to do it and no one in charge. And we're beginning to collect the people with the biggest networks within the food world already. And Breadfruit could so obviously become, thank you, I'm going to say that in a minute. Okay. Princess, is this from you? Okay, Ulube. From eBay to Ulube. Anyway, so anyone interested, Richard, would you stand up? Where are you? There he is, over there. Go and see him if you're interested in working on a food network that brings together the producers and the buyers and enhances the whole system for everyone economically. He's got writings you can read and is starting to hold the meetings here. So that's another way to get breadfruit going faster.
Okay, thank you. Can we get a round of applause for our panelists?